All right, so this is a really challenging sufficient assumption question just because it's kind of complicated with all the negated words and not really understanding what some of these things mean. But we have our historian saying, it is unlikely that someone would see history as the working out of moral themes unless he or she held clear and unambiguous moral beliefs. So that's our first premise. And then we continue on and say, however, one's inclination to morally judge human behavior decreases as one's knowledge of history increases. So the more I learn about history, the less likely I am to judge. That makes sense. Consequently, the more history a person knows, the less likely that person is to view history as the working out of moral themes. All right, so that conclusion is saying that the more history the person knows, the less likely I am to view history as working out of the moral themes. Okay, so obviously this is an argument. I know what my conclusion is. And then I have to ask myself, is this a valid conclusion? Which it's not, because we have a gap in our argument. I don't typically diagram, but just so you can see the different parts. In our first premise, we have the history as the working out of moral themes, unless he or she held clear and unambiguous moral themes. So that is one connection that we have, or two variables that we have related. On the other hand, we have, in our second premise, we have one's inclination to morally judge decreases as one's knowledge of history increases. So our problem here is our conclusion is is using things from our premises that aren't actually connected. So if we look at our conclusion and we look at what variables we have the more history a person knows, which is in premise number 2, where we talk about the knowledge of history. But in our conclusion, it's right here. So the more history a person knows, the less likely that person is to view history as the working out of moral themes. And so that part comes from number 1. And so because our premises don't have an overlap and we're talking about all different things, what our answer choice needs to do is somehow connect these two. So we're looking for an answer choice that is somehow connecting our premises. And since this is a sufficient assumption question, we are going to be looking for an answer choice that has stronger wording that's going to guarantee this conclusion. Now, for those of you that like diagramming, let's go ahead and diagram this so that you can see where the hole is. But I'm going to actually start by diagramming our conclusion. So our conclusion is the more history a person knows. So I'm going to diagram that by history a person knows, the less likely that person is to view history as working out of moral themes. So we don't have moral themes. Now let's start with stimulus number 1. How would we diagram this one? It is unlikely that someone would see history as the working out of moral themes unless he or she held clear and unambiguous moral beliefs. So essentially, if we have moral beliefs, then we must have clear beliefs. And what would the contrapositive of that be? Well, if we don't have clear beliefs, then we must not see history as the working out of moral themes. Which I'm getting that all from premise number 1. Should just put a number 1 there so it's less confusing. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this down, or conclusion down. Okay. Now, let's look at our stimulus number 2. I should have stayed with the same color so it wasn't so confusing. I apologize. So number 2, one's inclination to morally judge human behavior decreases as one's knowledge of history increases. So essentially, if we don't have moral judgment, then our knowledge of history must increase. So I'm going to go ahead and history knowledge. And think about that as a contrapositive too, which would be if we have less history knowledge. So I'm going to cross that out. Which once again, I'm getting this right here, knowledge of one's history. Do you look there? Means that my inclination to morally judge probably increases. And I'm getting that right here. So once again, you can see that nowhere in our conditional statements up here do we have history of knowledge or knowledge of history and the working and seeing history as the working out of moral themes connected. So somehow we need to connect these two things. And so what I'm going to do is in blue, I'm going to circle those in our conditional statements. So we have MT here, MT here, which is in our conclusion. And then our other one is knowledge of history. So I'm going to go ahead and circle that in red, knowledge of history, knowledge of history, knowledge of history. So what can we say that would guarantee that the more history a person knows, the more we're likely to have moral themes? Well, what about clear beliefs? What guarantees that we have clear beliefs? What if we said that the more clear beliefs someone has, and what can we say about that with premise number 2? We can maybe say the knowledge of history goes up. Or we could say with clear beliefs, maybe we can say something along the lines of moral judgment if we want to have clear beliefs, moral judgment would go down. Therefore, we're looking for something that connects those two. So if we look at answer choice B, the less inclined one is to morally judge human behavior. So if we don't judge, the less likely it is that one holds clear and unambiguous moral beliefs. Which would be connecting the two parts that we're trying to connect, which this should have been not having clear moral beliefs equals not having not morally judging. And that is why answer choice B is correct. Let me know if you have any more questions. I know that this one is extremely difficult. You really just I think that this one, if I was going to answer it, is if you can recognize which parts are not connected, how I did in the top, look for an answer choice that at least is connecting the two. So we're trying to close that gap and we can cross off a lot of answer choices just by doing that alone. So for example, A, historical events that fail to, like we never talk about moral disapproval. So it's really easy to cross off answer choice A. C, only those who do not understand human history attribute moral, like that doesn't matter. That's not connecting the variables that we need to be connected. If we look at D, the more clear and unambiguous one's moral beliefs, the more likely it is to view history as the working out of moral themes. So this one is connecting moral beliefs or clear beliefs. So CB and MT. Well, we already have that connected. If you look at our premise number 1, we already have that connected. So that's not connecting the two premises together to guarantee our conclusion. Because if you look here, the more clear and unambiguous one's moral beliefs, And then we have more likely to view history as working out of moral themes. That's not including our premise number 2 at all that we need. So that one's wrong. And then E, people tend to be less objective regarding a subject about which they possess extensive knowledge than regarding a subject about which they do not. Once again, that's not connecting our variables that we need to be connected. So this is saying people tend to be less objective regarding a subject. We don't talk about being objective at all in our stimulus. Extensive knowledge about a subject. We're talking about history, so it's not just any subject. And so once again, even if you get these confused in this answer choice, even if you got it confused about whether the clear beliefs and moral judgment, like which one needs to be the sufficient and which one needs to be the necessary, or even having them less or more, C is our, or B is our only good option because it's literally the only one that is talking about the variables that we need to have some type of relationship between. So if it comes in this answer choice, at least, you could have had a really good chance of getting this one correct if you just were looking to connect those two premises together, because the other ones don't even mention them. All right, so I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any more questions on this tough LR sufficient assumption question. And I'm going to go ahead and send this to you all. Okay.